Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to do a wrap-up of House of Leaves, which I'm going to assume you've consumed at least some of the stuff for my weekly videos leading up to this, because I'm going to basically just use that as a base from which to talk of it. So there's definitely going to be spoilers. If you don't want to watch the spoilers, check out my weekly reads video, which is just a, what is it, like 5 or 6 minutes of me talking about the book without spoilers, saying what I think it's about, because it's very subjective, and whether or not I liked it, which of course I did. Look at the annotations. I don't think I've had this much fun reading a book ever, pretty much. When last we left off, the house had taken the brother, Tom. He does not resurface, so I guess Tom is just gone. Daisy is saved though, and then, as you might expect, Karen takes off with the kids. Davidson is unwilling to leave, or he leaves for a short time and then he returns, and he continues to try to figure out what has happened. Only when he gets back, he finds that the house has more or less returned, as far as we know, but then he disappears, and we switch to Karen's perspective. She's with the kids, she's in New York. There's a weird kind of gotcha moment where all of the times in the past in the academia, it is talking about kind of very like male gazy and like prophetic view almost of Davidson. Like it looks down upon Karen quite often in the text, I would say, to a misogynistic level, and to some degree it's trolling that from other people's perspectives, but it definitely is trying to insinuate that Karen is like a minor player. But in these chapters we learn that the first two short story, or the cuts of the film, like 10 to 15 minute, almost not trailers but initial sort of concepts of the film, were actually done by Karen herself. And it does digress into her having affairs with other people, as it was alluded to in the past. But this seems to be, at least ostensibly, a galvanizing moment for her to realize that she can't live without Davidson. She really wants him back. She has her mother watch the kids, and she returns. There's also a, I don't know, kind of satirical, funny-ish section in which she has a interview of all these real-life characters in fictional context, asking them about the film, what they thought of it, and a lot of them hit on her and stuff. So I didn't find that particularly interesting or fascinating. It mostly, I think, is to predominantly tell you that this book is like a mirror. Whatever you want to see in it, you'll be able to tell. And it is mostly a reflection of yourself being a mirror. You'll see the things that you want to see, but also in so doing, you'll be entering the labyrinth yourself, as the other characters have as a reader. Karen goes back to the house, and for her, it's like unceded territory again, basically. Like, it doesn't feel like her house. The house has returned to its normal dimensions. Davidson is gone, but she continues to stay there. She starts planting roots. And after a week or two, I can't remember the exact amount of time, the house begins to accommodate her somewhat. She finds Davidson's film stuff and other supplies tucked away in a portion of the house. And as she is going to consume that content, the wall behind her essentially goes like darkness, or invisible, or not invisible, like Vanta Black, impenetrable. And we consume Davidson's tapes before it switches back. And Davidson's tapes is essentially him being lost in the world of himself, if you believe what I think the book is about anyway. He's unable to navigate, he's quite lost, which, if we believe the concepts that are brought into the book mean that he's unable to sort of project his own interiority into what he wants to be manifesting in the maze, right? Like, previously he sort of owned the space and was able to traverse it in whichever manner he was willing to or wanting to do. But then once Tom's death occurs, it becomes a completely different situation. He's lost in blackness. He's very like, it's almost like a self-deluded, nihilistic quest to die, basically. And Karen, as it switches back, is the only one that's able to enter that space, grab hold of him, and return him, essentially taking him outside of his own trauma. It is alluded to in one last interview that she is given that the house wasn't left. It simply dematerialized. Like, everything around them became nothing, and then suddenly she was out front in the lawn holding Davidson, who is suffering from multiple things that make him a person that needs to use a cane and possibly something else. I think he's missing like a chunk of his hip or something like that. So basically, as he was losing his selfhood, at one point he's even possessing the House of Leaves, ostensibly this book itself, and is burning it for light. But once everything goes out, he forgets even himself, which means that that place starts eating at him and consuming him, because he's not able to project his own thoughts onto it, or whatever you might believe of the labyrinth, I suppose. And so I think it's very like poetic and an allegory for trauma. That seems very likely, but it also continues to reiterate that it is a process of colonization, I think, that gives the house life and is able to create that interior space. And it's definitely the, journey inward, externalized, literalized. It requires generally other people to project what they think about us onto us in order to have a multifaceted view of ourselves and navigate life itself, as well as our own interiority. But because all of the stories mirror the same projections, I think that it is a story in which it is trying to say that everybody is navigating their own labyrinth, and trauma makes it so that you have less light to navigate, maybe no light at all for some people. Because when we move to Johnny's story, which we cannot believe, basically, like, he's told us many times that this is all falsehood, but ostensibly he goes searching for the house, which we learned is in Virginia and Jamestown, further reiterating on the colonization angle. And we learn that the house basically doesn't exist. It's no longer there, which, if we learn at the very end with Karen insinuating it may not have ever been there, or who knows what's going on with it. But it's not an accessible place for some people, even though other people have owned it and entered it and came out of it traumatized, as it alluded to. It may only be a space that's able to accommodate specific people. Who knows? Or it never existed at all. But anyway, Johnny looks for it. He goes on this wild rampage of self-destruction similar to Davidson, so everything is mirrored again. And essentially he ends up being told that his buddy is dead, and his the girl Kylie that he had an infatuation with, she ran off with her boyfriend in the bar and was driving the Volkswagen Rabbit, of course. He gets in an altercation with the boyfriend, and he loses his mind and kills the guy, and then even says that he rapes Kyrie, but then he takes it back. And he says none of that happened. And then he goes and meets a doctor couple and goes on this like extravagant vacation, but then he says that didn't happen. So more or less I think we see that his patterning is towards a mental break. And similarly, I think to Navidson, he enters his own labyrinth, but he completely disappears into it. I don't think I believe anything that occurs after the point when he just says he's going to look for the house. I think he is just somewhere in the labyrinth, completely in darkness, broken, probably having like a mental break, if that story has any cohesion whatsoever, basically. Whereas Navidson finds, the light in Karen, and Karen returns him out of himself. There's nobody like that for Johnny. It also makes a good parallel with the Whalestoe letters, in which his mother tells him the only way out of the darkness and his only means of combating something real, when he was getting in fights and stuff like that, was words, meaning that communication is key. Karen getting Navidson out, and her seemingly creating those projects of the initial film made her understand Navidson in a way that their communication never actually occurring finally clicked with her. She kind of like understands Navidson better, and that understanding and her ceding her own sort of Navidson's territory in the house in order to enter it is the reason that she's able to pull him out. So I think it's clear that Johnny just simply doesn't make it. He's just gone somewhere in the darkness, in the void. He even mentions, I cannot tell you why I didn't see her until now. And it wasn't a scent that brought her back either, or the wistful edges of some found object or any other on the road revelation. It was my own hand that did this. Maybe you saw her first? Caught a glimpse between the lines, between the letters, like a ghost in the mirror, a ghost in the wings. My mother is right before me now, right before you. There as a docent, as the interpreter, maybe even as this strange and tangled countryside, her shallow face, the dark lyric in her eyes, and of course her words, and those far-reaching letters she used to send me when I was young, secretly alluding to how she could sit and watch the night seal the dusk, year after year, waiting it out like a cat, or observe how words themselves can also write, or even in her own beautiful and yes, horrifying way, instruct me on how to murder, one day even demonstrate it. She is here now. She has always been here. Beware, she might have whispered, another wholly other lessens your great hold on slowing time, as she would have described it, being the madwoman that she truly was. She could have laid this world to waste. Maybe she still will. And everything after that is probably just like Johnny being broken and rambling on. And so I think that's all I want to say about it. I have a lot more thoughts, as you might imagine, but I think I traced a through line more or less with these videos, and I think that the reading holds up. But as I said, I think there's a lot of ways to read it, and I think the text is constructed so subjectively that you could find whatever meaning that you want into it, more or less. I think the overall themes are pretty patterned and indented such that nobody could miss them that much, but I think that whatever lens or gaze or view from the prison that you want to take for the very specific other themes or meaning behind the other intertextuality and the what is true about any of the stories or one of them in particular, what is the main narrative, what is not, if they're just completely mirrors, which I believe, of one story, and what happened to Truant even. I think that I still believe that the main narrative is Navidson's, and then Johnny was basically colonized in the same way that Navidson was colonized by the house, so it mirrors it. And Johnny was consumed by the labyrinth as Navidson would have been, and his story ends with that consumption, I think. I rated this 5 stars. It's the funnest experience, the act of consuming, that I've ever engaged with. I marked this up with tons of marginalia, lots of annotations, lots of stuff with it. I very much enjoyed this book, and I don't think I've had an experience like it. So if there is something else like this that you'd recommend, feel free to comment that too. And otherwise, I will see you next video. Bye.